Hi there. I'm Andrew Ralph Van Ostrin Adams. I know you're not supposed to tell people your full name because it takes away power or something. I don't really understand that. Maybe I'll pay for that later. Um, so yeah, I'm just let me just sort of explain because I think people misunderstand raw dogging and what that means. And it's a term that sort of goes around in neurodivergent circles. People who think a little differently, people with um, ADHD or labeled with autism, labeled with this, all kinds of different things. Just experiencing the world without drugs. Um, that doesn't mean not using medication, it means not self medicating. Um, Not using drugs and alcohol to put down the feelings that are bad about the way the world is and feeling that it's not fair or right in some way and just kind of throwing yourself into it. And it's a difficult process. I've been sober from alcohol for 20 years, and my initials are AA, so I joke that wherever I go, it's always an AA meeting. And I talk to people of all stripes who've stopped, and um, whenever we discuss um, our troubles with alcohol, um, and sort of surrender to the need to share that journey. It is defined as an AA meeting. It can be in a van, it can be in a church basement, it can be in a coffee shop, it can be on the street, it can be on the beach. I've had many of these conversations with people and on various parts of their journey, sometimes thinking about quitting, sometimes having quit for much longer than I've even been alive. I mean, I'm certainly not um, the first, nor will I be the last. I don't think prohibition works. I think it actually creates more problems than it solves. I think that we should be mindful about giving access to young people who are not fully developed because they need to develop their minds and not just and go through some experiences. And I have children. I quit because I wanted them to be able to have the freedom to enjoy alcohol socially. And two of my three children seem to do so. They're in university and they can go out on weekends and drink with friends socially, which is great. It's the disinhibitor. I remember enjoying alcohol, but I also remember it stopping me from enjoying alcohol. When I got too dependent on it, which I definitely did. And I went through hell and it was difficult. So I just wanted to say, I'm not really sure what to call this, but I think what's important is, you know, it, it's about the little choices that we make, and whether it's choices in our career, choices in our life goals, choices in our substance use, our weight. There's no magic pill to these things. Pills are sometimes part of a regimen of recovery, but it's our choices, our daily choices. We make little steps towards our goals, and I think we've sort of gotten away from the thread with these screens that life is work, and that one business transaction, one great idea, you know, edge cases and outliers and statistics are confusing because we think, oh, well, that could be us. And for most of us, like starting a YouTube account, for instance, it's work to develop followers, to get from the point where you are nervous and making all kinds of ums and likes and things like that. Public speaking is not easy. I did network facilitation. I facilitated a lot of meetings in social services for many years, and that it took a while for me to get my confidence. What's interesting though is I found that people didn't really want to listen to me when I was scripted, when I'd over researched. I guess it's a sense of not knowing what you're talking about. So I'm going to talk about my lived experiences. I do have a degree from U of T. I didn't graduate um, from high school because I had a lot of trouble in my youth with depression, and there was a suicide in my family and a death in this room actually. My aunt, people I love very much in the 80s passed, and my cousin died by suicide, and that kind of broke me. And I think in that morning, I couldn't get along with other kids, and I couldn't exist up at the local school. So I took some time, and I lived in the basement, and I was weird, and I got isolated. But it was a process too. Jungians would call it individuation. It was a process of individuation and integration, because I was always a little bit different. And, that worked as a little kid, but then, as kids get older, you get more into conformity and being normal. I think that peaks in high school, and I just couldn't hack being normal in high school. I was the weird kid, and once that lost its currency, I just couldn't. So I'm a redhead, and that was triggering for a lot of people. Apparently, I had a friend of me, I guess, I don't know, on a streetcar one day apologized to me. He said, the only reason we used to give you such a hard time, the only reason we beat you up is because you had red hair. And he was very apologetic, especially I was dating an older woman at the time. I was 18, she was 29. And it was a lovely relationship, actually. I mean, there's power imbalances, but in the end, we sorted ourselves out, and I think we both got a good experience out of it. I think she was always wanting it to go on forever, but I had to move on because I was only 18. But anyway, yeah, Kai apologized for that, and it meant a lot to me. And it was funny because my girlfriend at the time called him a name, a-hole or something like that. But I was like, oh, somebody finally admitted it. It wasn't anything that I'd done. It was just sort of this aversion that people have to redheaded boys, which is an interesting part of my story. And I'll get to that too. I'm just trying to find my feet here. But it's interesting because I had redheaded twins, and I learned a lot from them. My degree is in psychology and philosophy with a minor. I didn't really complete the minor in East Asian Studies because I was supposed to do a 100 level course for that. But anyway, I've studied a lot since. I'm a lifelong learner, whether I was in social services. I started meditating at the age of 4, which I've since learned is quite unusual. It actually says in the Bhagavad Gita that it's rare to be born into a family that meditates, and I can see why, because it's a very challenging period. And Mom was never, well, she said she was never really able to meditate herself, but she got me into meditating with Swami Radha at Yasodhara. Fame, infamy, I don't know, people go back and forth. I thought it was a lovely place, and I've learned so much about ashram, and it was kind of a retirement model for of sustainability. I thought it was a great idea. So yeah, and my mind's kind of goes like this off into the tangent. So once again, I'm not sure what to name this, but I'm just starting out. I'm going to forgive myself for making something imperfect, and I'll improve on it over time. And I think that's an important part of the message that I bring. I'm sitting in a chair that I salvaged from the garbage. It looks like it's an antique, maybe from early century, that's been refinished, possibly by Goodwill Industries. I recognize the work. I worked with a man who worked at Goodwill, in the sheltered employment program there, and he had done this job, and they would take this faux leather and refinish furniture. But I saw this on the curb, and I thought, I have to have this. It looks very comfortable, and I'm going to refinish it again. I'm going to give it a third life. One of the wheels falls out, and the skin of the synthetic leather is all falling out. I'm going to find. I've reupholstered things before, never a chair like this, but you know, there's always a first time for everything. And it won't be perfect because it'll be my first time doing this. It's a long time since I've reupholstered anything, but I'm going to learn pulling it tight and doing it like that. And that's basically part of life, is just starting something, being imperfect, making some mistakes, learning from those mistakes. I think this is sort of a counter to the narrative that now that we have AI and data and, you know, we're sort of watching everything, that everything should be perfect, that we make no mistakes. As a tradesperson, I was in the social services for many years. I'm a tradesperson now. Handyman. So I do various kinds of construction. A lot of tradespeople do keep their hands in many circles. We don't just do one thing. Usually we do lots of different things and travel where the market takes us. So we apply our trade and we learn, and we go from doing trim work to framing to stonework. It's a bit of a learning curve each time, and cuts and nicks and accidents do happen. Some people hurt themselves more regularly. I find those are people often who are struggling with their sense of identity, and often with substances, but not always. Sometimes things just happen, and we have to count that in. We are not robots, and I contend that even with robots, we're going to need a lot of human beings who actually know how things work. I think we're very far away from having robots to replace all of the paid labor. I think that's a common delusion that we've had. I've looked sort of through history and found that goes back thousands of years. That during times of abundance, people feel like they can automate everything and that labor is no longer necessary. And actually from Exodus, from Babylon, you can sort of see people think, well, we're pretty close. We're pretty close to being gods. Babylon Tower was to reach the sky and be gods. And of course, famously, they never reached the sky. They never reached the stars. They never reached the moon. They never reached Mars, Saturn. They're gods. It caused collapse, this thinking that you could do without people, without the people who do things. And unfortunately, a lot of people who were working under them just believed in them, and they thought, well, you know, as long as we think positively and serve these people who say that they're gods or close to gods or lesser gods, then everything will be fine. And it wasn't. It wasn't then, it wasn't in Egypt, and it wasn't you know, in Venezuela or Zimbabwe or Weimar Republic of Germany. There's a lot of instances where we keep having these collapses, mini collapses, because of this abundance thinking. I think it's good to think positively, but it's also good to think realistically and how much time it takes to get things done. You can't do infinite efficiencies. Even robots break down, and that'll slow down the entire crew. Things work differently in our minds and on computers than they do in the real world. And I think that's a very important thing for us to get grounded in, and to have like some lived experience of making something and see the challenges of making something real with our hands at every level, at every cast. so that we can all see that we're not perfect. Nobody's a god. We're all human beings. Um, some people may identify more as different things. It's interesting because I think our society's really gotten around angels and gods and you know dragons, and these are metaphors. These are really archetypes that we can grasp, and I think they're good. But remember the humanity of other people, whether they're um, walking your dog, or working at the bank, or the king, or the pope. They're all human beings. Ultimately, are we angels? Are we gods? No, we're human beings. We're playing certain roles, and we are going to make mistakes, and we need to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes, and we need to be forgiving of others, to access that divine in ourselves when mistakes happen. And I think in that moment of forgiveness of self and other, there is what we call radical acceptance. I too have erred. I have made mistakes, and perfection was never the goal. Perfection was an ideal. But looking around us and seeing what is good while we still have it, I think is important, because it does seem here in North America that most people around me have enough, and there are people suffering for sure. Some are, I don't know, they're on screens for me mostly. I have worked with homeless people, and I've seen people who don't have shelter, and that hurts. Far too many people who I know have passed over the past few years without shelter because they were imperfect in some way. I don't really understand it. A lot of them were citizens, and it feels like the social contract is broken down. And I think we need to rebuild it, because there's definitely, we talk about this K-shaped economy, and I don't really see that in history, and I can't really see that working out in the future. I guess there's once again this idea, the automaton, the robots are coming to save us from, the dirty, imperfect people. Well, we're all imperfect, whether we're tradespeople. I used to say, I occupy many castes because I come from church and, the ginger line, and, we talk well. We are spiritually connected. Church goes back in the family, but I won't invoke my family. Credentials, I don't really think that's a credential. I've also worked in the social services, and I've been a business owner of my own small business. It's very difficult. It's not easy to own a business. And I've been a humble worker. I haven't been the Dalit caste. I haven't been the living out on the streets. I have gone camping. I have stayed in homeless encampments with people. I have stayed in church basements. I also have never been a warrior. I've never gone to fight in a war. It's only one life, and we can only do so many things in the time that we're given. So I'm not doing that because I'm doing this. And what I'm doing, I think, is important. And for me, it's been a process of learning. I do not have a PhD. I do not have a master's. I've tried to get towards it, but something always stops me. And it's interesting when you sort of run into barriers, and maybe it's just throwing yourself at the same brick wall again and again. It's time to listen. I was following Jiang Shui-Shin for a while there, and he said, universities are no longer, I don't know. It's probably definitely a place for it. I've got a couple of kids in university, and I think they're learning what is essential for whatever comes next, commerce and mechanical engineering and, society, basically understanding how systems work. Because I feel like we're in a paradigm shift. And I think those probably come every century. I think they come with the change in the technology, this technology that we have, the social media, the AI. It may be a bubble. I think more people are talking about the AI bubble being a thing. I think we're seeing its limitations. I don't think it's a fidget spinner. I've made jokes about that in the past, but they were just jokes. Fidget spinners were very limited utility and very hyped. AI, I think it's good, but is it going to make my breakfast? No, I don't think so. And if it did, and if we had all the robots and all the people were replaced, and it's kind of like Last Man on Earth kind of thing. It's like, well, but what did I do this for? The people, the nature, all those things would be sacrificed if we turned everything to robots and machines. And I think that's important. To sacrifice the good, all the things we appreciate about, the out of doors here in Canada. It's a beautiful warm day. Hasn't been an extremely hot summer. It's been quite mild and easy to work outside, which is great because last summer was very hot. We had a heavy, hard winter, which is a good reset for our ecology. Things are getting a little bit more unpredictable, that's for sure. But I'm not a climatologist. I'm not a weather forecaster, so I'm just a person, a thoughtful person who's explored a lot of different subjects. I do consider myself a polymath, not the kind with many degrees. I have 1 degree, so I'm a certificate in mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And I've done a lot of deep learning. I do deep learning. I'm not great on multiple choice tests. I think that's one of the limiting factors of my certification in various areas because everything seems to be multiple choice. Although it's odd because I know from 30 something years ago, it's one of the worst ways to test somebody's capacity. It's basically a measure of your ability to mimic and to look for tricks and to look for exceptions. And being a master at multiple choice doesn't mean that you understand how things work. And maybe that's by design. So most people end up being followers. And the people who make it through to master's level have been followers long enough so that they can succeed. But I think we've reached a point, and it's interesting. I don't mean by no means, if you are Gen Z, I mean, my children, I think they've got a lot of embodied skills and they're intelligent. They've got depth and nuance and skills. Very intelligent people, and they're able to figure out the testing and get better grades than I did. That's great, Maybe that was having a little less chaos in the home that helped stopping drinking. Helped create an environment that was better for their learning, for their development. I hope so. If we can do a little bit better each generation, I think that's good. Aiming for perfection. If I was perfect, if I solved all the problems in the world, what would be left for them? That's my question. What would be the point? And I think we get to that point quite often where we believe that we've solved all the problems. And it's often people who've gotten to the top of their game who start talking about the end of the world, the end of science, the end of philosophy, the end of knowledge, the end of industry. It's interesting because I was reading a book by Peter Turchin, and I thought, there it is again. And there it is. 2022, I think, is the year that was written, and it's the end. The end of the world. Oh my goodness. How often are we going to predict the end of the world? You can look it up on I'll put the link into the description here. But the world has been ending for 2,000 years, and it keeps ending faster and faster and faster, and it's not ending. because I keep waking up every day. And that's anecdotal, but and for some people the world will, and for one day I will not wake up. That's for sure. So then my world will be over, you know. And did I have a good day the day before? I hope so. Um, you know, and I think I've had a good life, a hard life. Life is hard. Life is full of struggles. Um, you know, I've experienced a lot of violence and hardship in my life. I've been a peaceful warrior in response, and I do learn, know. I studied self-defense in order to navigate this world, but I've also successfully never used it to hurt people, and I think that's the important definition of self-defense. It would only be under extreme circumstances that you would be pushed to actually harm or end someone in self-defense. And once that happens, I think it's a huge process. I know I have a friend who did find himself in those circumstances, and it changed him profoundly, and he doesn't use drugs or alcohol, so it's been a long process for him. That's one thing I learned from veterans in church basements and shelters, and from veterans in cafes, is that it profoundly changes you once you've ended someone else in person, you know. And actually, from what I've heard, even by drone strikes, you know, some people just wake up to it, and it's very painful. And I don't have to experience that personally to know it. You know, when I was studying kung fu under William Chung, he came to town. It was under Wing Chun. Was it started with Brian? No. At the very top, it was William Chung. He was a friend of Bruce Lee. And under him was Brian Lawendo, I think his name was. And then under him, we had the senior brother, whose name is escaping me right now. That's interesting when that blocks. Anyway, I thought he was wonderful. I thought they were all wonderful people. But William Chung came to town, and we were studying dim mak, you know, different things. And, you know, he was a pressure point person, and so we practiced, and we had the weekend. We got the book, and we started. One of the young students, who was just a little junior to me and always had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, said, you know, this dim mak death touch. How do you know it works? And William Chung says, I don't know. I've never killed anyone. Which I thought was the perfect answer. It's like, we assume it works. And that's a way to be, you know, to sort of know you can defend yourself, but not have to. Because once you have to start defending yourself, it changes life, you know. And nobody wants to be put in that position, and the other person doesn't want to be harmed. And a lot of the time, I think it's the addictions, whether it's the addictions to substances or you know, even it seems even, you know, sexual behavior can be. I'm changing my mind on that. The apps, the dating apps, very addictive. I'm off all the dating apps, and if I meet someone, I meet someone. If I don't, whatever. I've got other things to do. But you know, the addictions seem to be a big part of it, right? Because once you interrupt that addiction, you know, the amygdala is raw and exposed, and the prefrontal cortex has been inhibited for a long time and suppressed, and you know, people will act out to get what they want. And you've seen that social media even has turned into a weapon against our better angels, against thinking before we act. Especially, I think, the short form videos. We won't mention brands, but the 15-second video apps, I think, are quite dangerous because they hijack our nervous system, and um, they make us forego our critical thinking. They activate our amygdala, they suppress or they prevent us from engaging because of the quick succession of videos over and over again. Our prefrontal cortex and thinking things through. And I think it is important to think things through before we act. On the flip side of that is endless thinking, and I think people with trauma often get into overthinking. And overthinking is a huge problem, always has been. I took a health anthropology course in my textbook, actually, just this year. And that seems to be one of the tribal knowledges the hunter-gatherers would see someone who overthinks as very diseased, someone who's just thinking and never acting isn't really contributing to the tribe. And I'm going to use the terms mouth noises and brain farts. So my ideas, my thoughts, these ruminations of mine are brain farts. They are byproducts of the digestion of intentional actions that I've taken in my life, and mistakes that I've made, and efforts that I'm making to do better have to be more than just mouth noises and images on screens and words, marks on paper. They have to be embodied experiences, or they don't really help anyone. So I do what I can to help myself so that I can help others. And I do balance that, you know. I think investing is important. I think mindful use of the tools that we have to help build and rebuild and help each other. I'm rethinking how much I help other people because I have been too helpful in the past. And I have to I use more discernment about who I help. And I think reciprocity is an important attribute. Someone who's willing to sit down and talk about the division of labor in relationships, whether they're professional relationships or romantic relationships or what have you. You know, we all have to walk away feeling like we got a good deal, or stay together feeling like we're getting a good deal, ideally. But you know, some things are just for short term, and some things are permanent. And I'm looking for longer term, but I'll do short term stuff to get through. That's what we all have to be, you know, especially in a changing world. I don't think that, you know, I think we have to be a little mindful of our long term, you know, goals. I saw some influencer from one of the LLM companies saying, we have the next 10,000 years of inventions worked out. What are you talking about? In 10,000 years, we don't have an idea of what we need next year. The next 10,000 years worth of inventions doesn't make any sense. That's, we have to know what we need, you know, and often it's very, very simple stuff. We can't model really what we're going to need for next week. And I think this is, we just kind of wake up and deal with what we have. And if we have a paycheck, if we have a salary, if we have, you know, some sort of security, that's great, you know. But a lot of us just live week to week, check to check, and we struggle through the world that comes, and as it changes, especially with climate chaos and change. I mean, look at the modeling from the 1960s, 70s, you know, the ecological, we're not in a Mad Max world. There's no reality to any of the modeling that was happening back then. And we think, oh, well, we've got 50 years later. 50 years is nothing, you know. If you look at, bring some humility to this world. And I find looking at fossils very humbling, because you sort of see all the dead ends. You see all the things that maybe are still surviving in some way. and what a long process it was to get us to this point. And to have the hubris to think, well, we invented an app, we invented a program that's going to figure out the inventions for the next 10,000 years. I mean, that really is hubris. That's thinking you've achieved omniscience and omnipotence. And I think that is the kind of hubris that can be catastrophic for people. If the person who, I doubt it, but if the person who said that statement is listening, I think we all get carried away with those things, and I certainly don't blame you for anything. I think we need to recalibrate. We all get very ambitious about new products, new ideas, new technology. That's why we keep having these tech bubbles. I'm hearing that helium is limited, and then that is actually going to interfere with the infinite data center expansion. Something had to. I think we've known that helium is limited for a while, and that microprocessors are dear things that we should be caring for and using, maybe not sparingly. I mean, this is the infrastructure that we have to deal with it, but trying to make things last and trying to use them for what matters. And I think communicating and that sort of thing is important right now. Whether the digital currency is important, that's above my pay grade. Whether social media is important, that's above my pay grade. I don't know. Those are issues for people in those fields to sort out. What is the most important thing to keep us together? But it is interesting to note that people are struggling. The depression has gone up. The sense of emotional depression, I'm talking about economic depression, with the advent of social media over the past 15 years, people are struggling more. And those are going to come at a long-term cost, not just to those individuals, but the economy in general, because we need those people to be productive so they can pay for the goods. Even if it's automated, we have to have some sort of productivity so that people can keep the economy going. And I think that, this is the idea of replacing everybody with robots is quite naive, because we need to have an economy, we have to have a reason. And I don't think anyone wants synthetic, I don't know about you, but I don't want a synthetic boyfriend or girlfriend in my pocket or in a robot or any of those things. I want to have real embodied experiences with people, whether they're partners or in business or in romance, love, friends. LLM isn't my friend. It's a good sounding board for some things, but it gets a lot of things wrong, and it's very forgetful. It seems to have very selective attention and selective memory. It's not a great friend if it is a friend. I've gone through several LLMs and just kind of deleted them all at this point. So yeah, I think that's a long enough video. 40 minutes is kind of the max. I don't think I'm going to appeal to people with 15-second attentions, but maybe people who enjoy longer form. And as I said, this is just a start. So, and I think maybe I'll title this, something more to do with about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, because I think that's the upthrust of it. When we have something good, if we aim for something perfect, I mean, it's basically the story of Narcissus, the one who starved to death, falling in love with their own reflection. And I think that we're not perfect, and no matter how much we groom ourselves and stare in the mirror, practice, our social media game, ultimately we are just here for a short time. We're not going to be loved by everyone, ever. We're not going to be perfect, because as soon as we're an extreme something else will come up and people won't like us for that. You can't please everyone all of the time. Thank you very much.